Fanny Crosby is widely recognized as one of the great American hymnists, renowned for her beautifully crafted Christian hymns. Despite losing her vision as an infant, Fanny Crosby composed over 8,000 hymn lyrics throughout her lifetime, with more than 100 million copies printed. She has inspired generations of churchgoers throughout the world with songs like Blessed Assurance, To God Be the Glory, I Am Thine, O Lord, and Pass Me Not, O Gentle Savior, earning her the title of Queen of Gospel Songwriters. Join us as Jane Buchanan navigates the life of Fanny Crosby, our next hero of faith. Frances Jane Crosby was born on March 24, 1820, in Southeast Putnam County, New York. Fanny was the only child of John Crosby and his second wife, Mercy Crosby. John and Mercy were possibly first cousins. However, by the time Fanny Crosby came to write her memoirs in 1906, the fact that her mother and father were related had become a source of embarrassment, and she maintained that she did not know anything about his side of the family. When she was an infant, Fanny lost her vision due to bad advice given by an unexperienced local physician when she was sick. In her own words about her condition, Fanny said,
"It seemed intended by the blessed providence of God that I should be blind all my life, and I thank Him for the dispensation. If perfect earthly sight were offered me tomorrow, I would not accept it. I might not have sung hymns to the praise of God if I had been distracted by the beautiful and interesting things about me."
After the death of her father when she was just 6 months old, Fanny was raised by her mother and grandmother. These women grounded her in Christian principles, helping her to memorize passages from the Bible. She became an active member of the John Street Episcopal Church in Manhattan, New York. As a child, Fanny loved to learn, but she couldn't get the adequate support she needed from her school, or any school within the area, because there was no support for people who were blind. She would later address this issue as a young adult. At the age of 15, Fanny entered the New York Institution for the Blind in 1835, where she received an excellent education. It was during that time that Fanny learned to sing, mastered the guitar, the piano, the organ, and became a noted harpist. This also marked the beginning of her talent as a poet. After graduating from the New York Institution for the Blind in 1843, Fanny and a group of lobbyists went to Washington, D.C., arguing for supportive education for the blind. Fanny became the first woman to speak in the United States Senate when she read a poem there calling for education for the blind in every state. She testified before a special congressional subcommittee, and she performed in the music room at the White House for President Polk and his wife. Among the songs that she sang as she accompanied herself on the piano was her own composition. Her words moved many to tears and received praise from John Quincy Adams, among others. Fanny's winning personality garnered lifelong friendships with several presidents and would later stay at the White House at times. In 1844, she launched her first volume of verse under the title, The Blind Girl and Other Poems. Many of these poems were autobiographical. Crosby described her hymn writing process.
"It may seem a little old-fashioned, always to begin one's work with prayer, but I never undertake a hymn without first asking the good Lord to be my inspiration.
Her capacity for work was incredible and could often compose 6 or 7 hymns a day. Her poems and hymns were composed entirely in her mind, and she worked on as many as 12 hymns at once before dictating them to a transcriber. On one occasion, Crosby composed 40 hymns before they were transcribed. In 1846, Fanny Crosby was hired as a teacher at the New York Institution for the Blind for 11 years, teaching English grammar, rhetoric, and American history. In 1858, at the age of 38, Fanny Crosby and fellow New York Institution of the Blind teacher, Alexander Van Alstyne, were married. Alexander was a scholarly, accomplished musician who was also blind. He was supportive of his wife, often transcribing her poetry and hymns. In 1859, Fanny and Van had a daughter named Frances, who tragically died in her sleep soon after birth. After the death of their daughter, Van became increasingly reclusive, causing a downward shift in their marriage. By 1880, they had separated. Despite living separately for more than 2 decades, Crosby insisted that they maintained an amiable relationship, kept in contact with one another, and even ministered together on occasion. In 1868, Fanny met William Howard Doane, a rich business tycoon, inventor, and Christian worker. Doane knew of her prolific hymn production and specifically went from his home in Cincinnati to meet her at her home in New York City. They struck up a long and productive friendship, working together, she as lyricist and he as music composer. Shortly after they met, he asked her to write the words to a hymn containing the words "Pass me not, O gentle Savior." Shortly after that, she heard an inmate cry out during one of her prison ministries, "Good Lord, do not pass me by." This spurred her inspiration, and she wrote the lyrics to Doane's requested hymn. William Howard died and became Crosby's principal collaborator in writing gospel music hits such as "I Am Thine, O Lord," "Draw Me Nearer, Near the Cross," "Pass Me Not, O Gentle Savior," "Rescue the Perishing," "Care for the Dying," "Safe in the Arms of Jesus, Savior, More Than Life to Me," and "To God Be the Glory." Another collaborator who Fanny worked with produced one of her most recognized gospel songs, "Blessed Assurance." The music was composed by her good friend, Phoebe Palmer Knapp. Phoebe Knapp was a wealthy Methodist who was married to Joseph Fairchild Knapp, a Sunday school teacher and co-founder of the Metropolitan Life Insurance Company. The song was created when Crosby was visiting her friend Phoebe Knapp, as the Knapp home was having a large pipe organ installed. The organ was incomplete, so Phoebe, using the piano, played a new melody she had just composed. When Phoebe asked Crosby,
"What do you think the tune says?"
Phoebe didn't hear a response, so she played it again. When she was finished, she still had not heard a response. When she turned around to see why she was not responding, Phoebe saw Fanny on her knees in prayer. Assuming that Fanny hadn't paid attention to her performance of her melody, Fanny would retell this moment in her memoir, writing,
My friend Mrs. Knapp composed a melody and played over to me 2 or 3 times on the piano. She then asked me what it said, and I immediately replied, "Blessed assurance, Jesus is mine. Oh, what a foretaste of glory divine."
Within the next few moments, Fanny Crosby wrote 3 verses and a chorus to Phoebe Knapp's melody. Their beautiful collaboration, Blessed Assurance, was published in 1873. The music and verses which Phoebe Knapp and Fanny Crosby composed have remained unchanged. They also collaborated on Open the Gates of the Temple. Fanny did not become wealthy through her hymn writing. In those days, the copyrights to songs were assigned to the music authors, not jointly to both the lyricist and composer. Fanny was usually paid $1 or $2 for each poem that she wrote, while the composer collected all the money. She did not share in the considerable profits that her poems helped bring to the companies that published her songs. She never resented this arrangement or to have thought of it as anything other than normal music publication procedure. Most of her publishers, however, made sure she had the money she needed to survive, and even after she no longer supplied them with new lyrics, they paid her a stipend of $8.00 per week, which was enough for her to live on in those days. Any money that she did receive, Fanny often gave it all away to help some needy individual, then asked the Lord to provide what she needed for her own food, rent, and other basic necessities of life, which leads us to an often overlooked part of Fanny Crosby's life: rescue missions. While known today primarily as a prolific hymn writer, Fanny Crosby was also an influential figure in the rescue mission movement of the late 19th century in New York City. Many of Fanny's hymns emerged from her involvement in the city missions, including More Like Jesus, Pass Me Not, O Gentle Savior, and Rescue the Perishing, which became the theme song of the home missions movement. Along with her friend Phoebe Palmer Knapp, Fanny Crosby helped to promote the rescue mission movement. After 6 months of illness, in 1915 in Bridgeport, Connecticut, Fanny Crosby died at the age of 95. She left funds in her will to start a home for homeless men in the Connecticut city. The Fanny Crosby Memorial Home for the Aged operated from 1925 to 1966, when it was merged into the Bridgeport Rescue Mission. Fanny Crosby was the most prolific of all 19th century American sacred songwriters. Crosby was posthumously inducted into the Gospel Music Hall of Fame in 1975. Known as the Queen of Gospel Songwriters, and as the mother of modern congregational singing in America, with dozens of her hymns continuing to find a place in the hymnals of Protestant evangelicalism around the world. She was buried at Mountain Grove Cemetery in Bridgeport, Connecticut, near her mother and other members of her family. Her family erected a very small tombstone at her request which carried the words, "And Fanny, she hath done what she could." Fanny J. Crosby. She lived to be God's servant, whether it was through her poetry, her hymns, or through her rescue missions, all of which is still blessing countless people today. This makes Fanny Crosby Full of Hope Ministries, hero of faith.
Blessed assurance.